you referenced 3 wide receivers that you think could have a blow-up type game that could massively impact fantasy football playoff performances. Who are those 3 wide receivers that are really trending up because of their strength of schedule?
Yeah, that would be Jacoby Myers, Malik Nabers, DJ Moore, who have far and away the best remaining strength of schedule. You actually all only have like a neutral matchup in your championship week 17. But these next 2 weeks, all of them, and also, by the way, like Romo Dunze and Keenan Allen and Wandale, they're a little less relevant. All have back-to-back top 3 matchups. And I think at least one of them has the potential to do what Amari Cooper did in week 16, where starting him was basically an auto win to get you to your fantasy championship. If I had to pick one, it would be DJ Moore. And he might not have the highest like median projection in my head, of these wide receivers, but I feel like he definitely has the best ceiling. What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Which players have the best upcoming schedule in the fantasy football playoffs? Maybe some dark horse candidates to have smash performances that will lead fantasy managers to titles. But before we talk about the fantasy football playoffs, we've got to talk about the Buffalo Bills and the LA Rams. Unbelievable game. 44-42 score. The best quarterback performance of Josh Allen's career and the best wide receiver performance of Puka Nakua's career. Scott, where are you at on this game? Just how impactful was it for you? And talk a little bit about these 2 insane performances.
Yeah, well, you're actually selling Josh Allen short. It wasn't just the best game of his career, but it was the best game by any quarterback in NFL history. 51.9 fantasy points that surpassed George Blanda's 49.7 in week 11 of 1961. And yeah, so he came into the week ranking 4th in fantasy points per game, now ranked 2nd. And I bet that holds throughout the remainder of the year. And it's just basically like, imagine, so you're saying Lamar Jackson, fantasy QB1. And part of that is, we know he's has this supernatural talent, but he's forced to do it all by himself because this Baltimore defense has regressed tremendously. It's the same thing with Josh Allen. In close games, Josh Allen's like, all right, training wheels come off. I'm going to start running more. You need me to be Superman. I'm going to be Superman. And so in games decided by 4 or fewer points, he's averaging 31.6 DraftKings fantasy points per game, just 23.2 in all other games. And then Puka Nacua, like you said, best performance of the season. And like what this season might be even more impressive to me than last year's record-breaking rookie season, because you have the healthy Cooper Kupp now, and you look at the 6 games that they've played together, full games for Nacua, where he didn't leave early. He's out targeting Cooper Kupp 67-47, would easily lead all players in XFP per game, fantasy points per game. And you see him really separating himself as the clear alpha wide receiver 1. And like, that's not to diminish Cooper Kupp. You know who leads all players in XFP per route run or targets per route run? It's Nacua. And then second is Cooper Kupp, who had, maybe the best fantasy wide receiver season ever just a few short years ago. So I concluded my Nacua blurb by saying, yeah, he's an easy top 3 dynasty wide receiver for me. He was, I thought, one of the most, egregiously mispriced wide receivers in all of dynasty leading into the season. So I feel good about that. You told me that was controversial. I didn't know that. So,
well, maybe
do you agree or disagree?
I would say maybe controversial isn't the correct word. I think that it makes sense. But I would say that it's that the sort of the top 3 going into the year, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, that tier just felt a little bit kind of like cleaner than the tier after it. And I would say that Nacua, it was more of, I think, sort of maybe a lesson learned here is he people were very quick to try to move Marvin Harrison Jr. ahead of Puka Nacua, and it was really more of a speculation play rather than we have all this incredible data on Puka Nacua. And I actually had the same take you just did on this season's much more impressive to me than the rookie season. I'll also say, Scott, when we see players miss time and come back with dominating performances, like spend time on the injured reserve and then come back. So like something bad goes poorly for them, and then they're able to bounce back and play even better afterwards. I think that's like something that's carried a lot of like the big time, long time performers in fantasy football. You can circle multiple players who this has happened to over the years. So for me, like I completely agree with you on the Puka Nacua side that just how impressive this season has been. We're going to dive into a bunch of these dynasty rankings coming up. I think at the end of the day, though, he's right in that somewhere between wide receiver 3 and like wide receiver 6 range. Probably closer to wide receiver 3, though. For me, it's just CeeDee Lamb. I've already seen him have a wide receiver 1 overall season where he took it over. Whereas Puka Nacua, like last season, was super impressive, but the touchdown totals were kind of low. And then this year, we're seeing this massive, massive run, but it's over a smaller sample size than what we saw with Lamb last year. And Lamb still has that relative young age to him. It's not like Nacua is like doing this at 21 years old. And then I do throw Malik Nabers into that mix because what he was able to do statistically in terms of all the metrics that you can look at Fantasy Points data, target share numbers, air yard share numbers. I mean, this is just a guy who, if he gets improved quarterback play, you could see having potentially multiple wide receiver 1 overall type seasons in his career. So I think I'm right there with those guys. I do think Puka Nacua ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's pretty much everybody's on that tip. And I love your Josh Allen take as well. Anytime we have to start going back to Otto Graham to find a player who's done what he's done, then we're in just masterclass territory. But here at the School of Scott,
Well, I did just want to say, I think you're right. I might be sleeping on CeeDee Lamb, but I don't know. I think Puka has the CeeDee Lamb season we saw last year. I think he has that next year, and he might have that the year after that as well. Cooper Kupp, 31 years old, 32 next year, extensive injury history, like PPR cheat code upside of all, just like out of control. So I don't know. I still feel good about that, but you might be right where it's like a tight top 4 rather than, he's the clear 3.
An offseason full of debates. And I'll say one thing that we didn't discuss was the 5 rushing attempts that they gave him. I think this is something where they're trying to get the ball in his hands more. And I don't know if it was because of the opponent they were playing, the game flow, but that's sort of like BYU Puka Nacua, where they were giving him like manufactured rushing attempts. So for me, that's like, I don't know. Could be a really, really fun stretch run when you see Nacua get 17 touches in a game. It's like complete wheels up for him rest of the season. But yeah, more dynasty talk in the offseason because at the School of Scott, we're constantly saying that we are taking a deeper dive into the box scores and trying to make you become a better fantasy football player. And this is the time of year where strength of schedule really comes into play for so many fantasy managers. It becomes a 1-week season in most fantasy football formats where making that correct start-sit decision can literally end your season, Scott. And when you start that guy because maybe you have a good feeling about a matchup with some statistical-based information behind it, and that player overperforms, like that's low-key one of the better feelings in fantasy when your gut shot flex overperforms and you made a difficult start-sit decision. So one thing I saw that you wrote in the Everything Report, and that's available to you over at Fantasy Points. Check that out. Must-read article every week by Scott. You talked a little bit about strength of schedule, and you linked something you put on X, which everybody should go take a look at, where you basically showed the best strength of schedule at all 4 positions. And I'd like to start out by talking about that a little bit. There's a player that we've sort of hyped for. I mean, we're going to victory lap a lot this time of year, Scott, but one player we want to victory lap a little bit about early on here is David Njoku. He's sort of been Mr. December last year and then the start to this season with these two very impressive December performances. But he's been targeted 30 times over his last 2 games played. And now, according to your research, he has the second softest playoff schedule of any tight end in football. Are we talking about a repeat of last year or potentially something even better? We could be looking at like 20 points per game at the tight end position over the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, yeah. You look at what he's done the last 2 weeks, 30 targets, more than any other player. It's kind of weird. Like I guess the production has been there, is 3 touchdowns and some receptions, but efficiency not really, the yardage not there. So maybe things are different with Jerry Jeudy, ranking behind only Jamar Chase in yards per game since Jameis Winston took over. But I don't know. I think that's right. I think the expectation should be Njoku coming close to what he did last year, where he was far and away one of the most valuable players you could have owned in fantasy. Averaged 22.1 fantasy points per game over the final 5 weeks of the season. That was behind only 2 wide receivers. Would have led all tight ends by something like, or minus Evan Ingram by like 40%. Ingram also went on like a heater at the tail end of last season. And yeah, I love Jeudy. I think he's awesome. But he's just not getting he's putting up wide receiver 1 numbers. He's just not getting wide receiver 1 target volume. And Njoku is. And so you add on to that second best matchup of any schedule of any tight end. I think he's set up perfectly to do exactly what he did last year.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I certainly have a ton of David Njoku. He was a player that I recommended trading for in Dynasty in my Dynasty article at Fantasy Points towards the trade deadline for FFPC. Sort of, he's got this underrated reputation where just on a Dynasty perspective, people refuse to sort of move him up to the truly, truly elite tier. But he's been a league record last year. And Scott's not the only one with very, very dank stats on this show. I'll drop a dank one for you. So Major League Baseball has Mr. October. That's Reggie Jackson, who continually outperformed in the playoffs. For us, we have Mr. December. David Njoku has averaged 21.7 points per game over his last 6 December games. So this guy is truly bringing it home in fantasy football for really 2 years in a row. And I think I agree with you that everything's sort of setting up for him to absolutely smash the rest of the way. Getting away from the tight ends, let's talk about Njoku's former teammate for a moment. Last year, if you played best ball, like if you were like a heavy hitter in best ball and you maxed out contests, Amari Cooper either made or broke your season. Because I know a lot of competitive best ball players who were completely knocked out if they had a lack of exposure to Amari Cooper in week 16. Well, last year, Amari Cooper put up this insane scoring outburst that was just remarkable and almost completely out of nowhere for him to put up that high of a scoring outburst. This was kind of the best ball elimination game that either was something that you look back fondly upon or you look back and it like kind of lives in infamy. You referenced 3 wide receivers that you think could have a blow up type game that could massively impact fantasy football playoff performances. Who are those 3 wide receivers that are really trending up because of their strength of schedule?
Yeah, that would be Jacoby Myers, Malik Nabers, DJ Moore, who have far and away the best remaining strength of schedule. You actually all only have like a neutral matchup in your championship week 17. But these next 2 weeks, all of them, and also, by the way, like Romo Dunze and Keenan Allen and Wandale, they're a little less relevant. All have back-to-back top 3 matchups. And I think at least one of them has the potential to do what Amari Cooper did in week 16, where starting him was basically an auto win to get you to your fantasy championship. If I had to pick one, it would be DJ Moore. And he might not have the highest like median projection in my head, of these wide receivers, but I feel like he definitely has the best ceiling. You just look at what he's done since Thomas Brown took over. He's seen at least 7 targets in 4 of 4 games, averages 9.5, 3 design targets per game. So you know what, that does increase his floor. And then you saw on Thanksgiving, if you included plays negated due to penalty, he had 6 deep targets, which is one of the most of any player in any game this season. And then last week, he was really badly banged up. But yeah, 18.8 fantasy points per game since Thomas Brown took over. You saw that insane usage, good volume, good production on Thanksgiving, a little banged up last week, and now back-to-back top 5 matchups. I could see a week winning performance from him for sure.
Yeah, I think DJ Moore also is not dealing with just a potentially absurdly bad quarterback performance in a particular game that could just wreck
Well,
them.
he
Like,
is. He,
well,
I mean,
he is,
it's
but
not Desmond
not at the not
Ritter
at those.
bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's levels to it. It's bad, but it's not like, okay, this could go really, 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 really bad. It could go bad, but not quite as bad as those guys. I love that you're on DJ Moore. I think this is one where, like, seeing him bounce back with the regime change was sort of a breath of fresh air for DJ Moore fantasy managers. This was a really, really frustrating season, but maybe some of these teams can get it back. And also, you have for best ball, for potentially the fantasy football playoffs, when you're in big contests, a guy like DJ Moore, there'll be fewer DJ Moore teams in the field. So a blow up contest could make even more of an impact. And I'll say Malik Nabers, to me, this is one where we had the news sort of on Friday that he's dealing with injuries. I was nervous enough to include that in my Athletic article because I thought maybe he was going to get shut down for the year. So for him to come back and get 10 targets, I think that was a big win for Malik Nabers fantasy managers. Just on a pure talent perspective, it seems like he's due for a very big one. Despite the situation at quarterback, despite the limitations of the offense, like the Baltimore game this week, this could be a really, really big Malik Nabers one. He's sitting on 80 receptions for the year. We've been sort of talking about the Brock Bowers rookie reception records, but at the end of the day, Malik Nabers now has 4 games left where we're talking about a guy who could get pretty high up there in the totals as well. Want to pivot over and talk a little bit about the running back situation, because one of the teams that has a very positive schedule is the New York Jets. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, why you like the Jets running backs in the fantasy playoffs, and is this a Breece Hall take, or would you have confidence in an Isaiah Davis or Braylon Allen if, say, Hall was shut down for the year?
Yeah, so the Jets have a top 3 matchup this week and a top 3 matchup in week 17. I'm kind of hoping it's Breece Hall, and I know we talked about last week the potential for them to shut him down, but he was barely healthy enough to play 2 weeks ago, and he still had over a 60% snap share. It doesn't seem like this team wants to give up. Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to give up too much, I don't know, pride at stake, because there's going to be a new regime ushered in next year, and so I feel like I would trust Breece Hall is like a fringe RB1 this week, given the matchup, given the 60+% snap share last time he was banged up. But if it's not, if we get this sort of Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis committee, it's kind of tough to say who I like. It seems like a perfectly evenly split 50-50 committee backfield. I think in any game, the Jets are likely to lead throughout, which doesn't seem like should be a high expectation in any given week. It would be Braylon Allen, who really profiles as that early down workhorse who gets better the more touches he tends to get. And so yeah, you see Jacksonville this week. If Breece Hall's out, I do kind of like Braylon Allen. I think in DFS you would stack him up with the Jets defense and hope the Jets command a lead throughout, and maybe that's a 20 carry game. And last week was more just a function of a tight game script. But if they do shut down Breece Hall, then it looks like Isaiah Davis in week 16 against the Rams, week 17 against the Bills. But really, you're hoping for Breece Hall, and I think Breece Hall can succeed in any of those matchups.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think Breece Hall is going to get shut down. I think that, like, if he doesn't play this week, I don't know if they're going to bring him back. I think this whole, like, I know Jeff Ulbrich is kind of saying the right things here, and they're sort of not at that point to shut him down, but I do think there'll be some caution, and also this sort of like, what are we playing for thing here, and also seeing what you have with these two rookie running backs who have looked impressive. Each of them has sort of looked impressive at times this season. I'm with you though, Braylon Allen. I think if I would have told you he gets this many carries, this many targets, and without the context of Isaiah Davis scoring a touchdown, I think people sort of would have taken it. It's a true split, but what better team to have a split against than the Jacksonville Jaguars in a game that, if the Jets have an opportunity to kind of put it on, I think that they will. Jags are sort of in bad shape. Scott, let's spend like 30
So I don't feel super strongly about this. Like, you very well might be right. I just think this is like a mildly interesting detour. This is something I've talked to, I think Sigmund Bloom popularized, and we've talked about it a lot on his show, but it's the assumption of rational coaching, or maybe rational GMing, where, like, yeah, you have nothing to play for. You should shut Breece Hall down. That makes all the sense in the world. I think that's a fallacy, the assumption of rational coaching. What I think matters more is what Charlie Munger would say, which is, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. And it's like, Ulbrich knows he's not going to be with this team next year. And so, he wants to make himself look as good as possible. I think Aaron Rodgers as well has taken so much heat. He is playing through multiple injuries. He's refusing to get his x-rays done, and he's just out there anyway. I think these guys are going to play hard. I wouldn't be surprised if Breece Hall stupidly comes in with a limited practice participation every day this week, and then somehow gets a 75% snap share. I think that would be stupid, but I also kind of think that's the most likely outcome. But again, I don't really know. I just thought that might be an amusing detour.
On the flip side, you've had sort of a positive storyline this season with Najee Harris. We talked about him a few weeks ago after he had a really strong performance. And 2 weeks ago, he was a top 5 running back. But this past week, George Pickens was missing, and there was sort of a change in the running back usage in Pittsburgh. This is also a team that's shaping up for a very difficult fantasy playoff schedule. Talk a little bit about your confidence level in Najee Harris and the impact of Jaylen Warren, and really what the Steelers are facing the next few weeks.
Yeah, I really don't have much confidence in being able to predict this situation too much. Maybe I was a little too overly excited about Harris's uber bell cow workload the previous week. But yeah, it was Jaylen Warren who, without George Pickens, tied for the team lead in target share, had over a 50% snap share. And yeah, by the way, no receiver really stepped up. I mean, Freiermuth scored a touchdown, but yeah, it was like a really gross 4-way committee where I don't think any of the other wide receivers are fantasy relevant. And so he gets, so the Steelers get the Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, and it would make sense for, like, certainly that hurts Najee, who we know is not as strong in negative game scripts. But it seems like this should benefit Warren, 15% target share last week. These are all games where certainly not a lock for Steelers to win, like many of their games. So they trail behind. Maybe we see Warren get a lot more playing time and a lot more targets, certainly more than Najee would have.
And regarding George Pickens, just go rest up George Pickens, because you play on Christmas Day, and we want everyone with George Pickens on their teams to get like a 35-pointer. So go rest up. Christmas Day, 35-pointer. That's sort of our goal here. You can find all of the information that Scott is referencing over at Fantasy Points in his article, The Everything Report. And all of the data we're going to discuss is available to you through Fantasy Points data. Go check it out. Highly recommended. Scott, one player who had an exceptional performance in Week 14 was Jordan Addison. This is a player that if you started him and you needed a win in week 14 to get into your fantasy football playoffs, Addison certainly delivered. He ended up with a 39-point game. This was the highest fantasy outperformance of his entire career. And this has been a player that has scored a ton of touchdowns in his short career. It's now at 17 touchdown catches in only 28 regular season games played. How highly should we be valuing Addison down the stretch and in the fantasy football playoffs?
Yeah, this was kind of one I saw coming. I liked Addison more than just about anyone in DFS last week. And I think this is real. He's now out targeted and outscored Jefferson in 3 of their last 4 games together. He ranks 7th among all receivers in first read target share over that span. Jefferson ranks 45th. Addison also ranks 6th in fantasy points per game. Jefferson ranks 20th. I'm not really at all worried about Jefferson. He's the best wide receiver in football. If he's not, he's the second best behind Jamar Chase. So he's still like an easy top 3, top 4 wide receiver in redraft in my eyes. But I am viewing this Jordan Addison ascendance as real. I think he's a high end wide receiver 2 this week. And like, yeah, it's sort of coming at Jefferson's expense, but I mean, Chase is behind T Higgins in first read targets in games they've played together this year. And like, that hasn't slowed him down at all. Maybe the more involved Addison is, the more tape you have on him making big plays, teams start to recognize you can't just double Jefferson. And so that opens Jefferson up, further down the road, hopefully, ideally. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I really like Addison, and Addison was one that really fell this year in ADP. It was sort of a gravitational pull with all Minnesota Vikings skill position players, and they've all sort of delivered. Justin Jefferson, you were able to get him later than you've ever been able to draft him since his rookie season. He's wide receiver 2 overall, which doesn't mean as much as wide receiver 2 overall has in some previous years, but still wide receiver 2 overall. Jordan Addison dropped significantly with some of the quarterback concerns. And then Aaron Jones has been a value this year as well. So it sort of continues the trend here. But for me, Addison's in this could be in very rare company, Scott. If he has 3 more touchdown grabs this year, that'll put him on 10 in the season. That'll be his second consecutive year with double-digit touchdowns in only 2 years played. The only other Minnesota Vikings with 2 seasons of double-digit touchdown scores are Chris Carter, Randy Moss, and Adam Thielen. So he's really moving up there in the record books. Now, my question for you is, we've talked about like the incredible wide receiver consolidation, the teammate target share for the Cincinnati Bengals and also for the LA Rams in multiple previous shows. With the way the performance we just saw out of Addison and Jefferson, would you put this duo into the mix with Cincinnati and the LA Rams if you had to if you could roster a wide receiver duo for the fantasy football playoffs? Are these guys at least in the conversation, or they're still a very solid third behind our 2 favorites?
Yeah, they're a very solid third. It's hard to compare them to Nakua and Kupp, who rank first and second in targets per route run, or T Higgins and Jamar Chase, who like combine their fantasy points per game, and no other duo comes close. So yeah, definitely a third, but it's like interesting. And like that's why I made that comparison to, Chase being behind Higgins in targets, but still, even more productive in games Higgins has played. Like, I don't know necessarily that this hurts Jefferson, or at least I just like refuse to believe it. But yeah, Addison, no doubt, has stolen his thunder. Jefferson only 1 game with double digit targets this year. He hit that mark in 7 of 8 full games last year. Fewer spike weeks. He had one last week, but again, Addison outscored him. But yeah, definitely third, I would say.
So just to stick with wide receivers, your thoughts on Brian Thomas? This is a player where we talk about bad quarterback situations. It's a Mac Jones-led offense. We have really no confidence in the quarterback, but there's some really strong trends with Thomas lately. Your confidence level in Thomas finishing out his rookie year sort of on a continued upward trajectory. He's had 18.7 and 16.6 points scored over his last 2 games. And Scott, the target numbers are tremendous. He's had his 2 highest target totals of the season since Jacksonville's bye week.
Yeah, I want to lead off by saying no, Mac Jones is really bad for BTJ. Mac Jones is 0 of 13 on deep passing attempts with 3 interceptions. So he ranks 45th, or there are 44 quarterbacks who've thrown completed a deep pass attempt. Mac Jones is not one of them. And like, that's BTJ's bread and butter. So that is not great. The good news is volume's been awesome. He had 215 air yards in week 13. That was 55% more than his previous high. Last week, 47% first read target share. First time he was over 33% all year by fantasy points per game, XFP per game over the span. Fringe top 15. That's also where I'd rank him, honestly, like despite the Mac Jones concerns. Just no Christian Kirk, no Gabe Davis, Evan Ingram struggling. I just think he's really good too. Like our producer Thomas would say this isn't real and no one's selling BTJ in Dynasty, but if anyone was, like, I would absolutely want to be buying. Before he had that chest injury, he was averaging 2.81 yards per route run through the first 8 weeks of the season. That would have ranked behind only Nico Collins and Justin Jefferson at the time. Would have ranked as the best wide receiver season in fantasy points data history. So really buy into the notion that this is a very high caliber talent. And so despite the quarterback concerns, he'd be a mid-range wide receiver 2 for me. And obviously a player I would love to have in dynasty leagues.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. And if the season ended today, you would have 2 rookie wide receiver 1s, which was sort of when we podcasted last summer, that was a prediction that I continually made on a bunch of shows, was that we were going to have 2 wide receivers, rookie wide receivers, finish as wide receiver 1s on the season. One was Marvin Harrison Jr., not Brian Thomas, but at least that was a pretty good prediction. And I think that people are going to get more and more excited about Thomas when we get to the offseason and sort of his pathway to a big time year 2, because things will settle out a little bit for Jacksonville. I think that the sentiment on the community is just so bad with everything Jacksonville related. But hey, there's rumors they're going to get Ben Johnson as their head coach. There's going to be a lot of potential things that could happen to sort of even things out. And we'll also enter the year with Brian Thomas as the focal point of the offense, the unquestioned focal point of the offense. So hey, Josh Gordon maybe in year 2 for Brian Thomas. I think we're looking at a potential blow up season. So for Thomas, I'm excited, and I do think he'll close out the season well. If he's going to get this sort of target volume, it doesn't really matter how bad Mac Jones is. I think he'll do enough with it that he's going to give you, like you said, I completely agree on the wide receiver 2 values. So let's stick with really, really bad teams right now. Are we seeing a repeat of last year, where Antonio Pierce leans on a lightly used running back, and this running back is able to sort of thrive through volume and give us running back 2 performances in the fantasy football playoffs? Last year, it was Zamir White. This year, it looks like Sincere McCormick. McCormick is trending up, at least in terms of usage, and Amir Abdullah was completely invisible. It's the McCormick show in Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, Zamir White won people fantasy leagues last year, and he won Antonio Pierce a head coaching gig. So I could definitely see him doing the same with Sincere McCormick, who, by the way, has been awesome. You look at all of his efficiency metrics: 6th in yards per carry, 3rd in explosive run rate, 9th in yards after contact per attempt. You look at Zamir White, Alexander Madison, they're all like bottom 10 in those metrics. So like, why wouldn't you give this a shot? Right. I don't know that I totally believe it. It's a small sample, and I'm not really sure this guy's that good, but I could certainly see it happening. I think, we're in the territory where, like, yeah, why not just blow a bunch of fab on the guy? Because there's probably not going to be another player with as much upside we'll find throughout the remainder of the season. But yeah, I cautious optimism, I would say. What do you think? Did you do any deep dives on McCormick as a prospect when he was coming out?
At Texas San Antonio, he had nearly 3,000 rushing yards, and it was a team that was sort of trending up. That was like a Texas San Antonio was sort of a positive storyline, and McCormick was their like focal point, but I didn't really think of him necessarily as an NFL guy. And most of the teams certainly didn't either. He spent a lot of the season on the practice squad. But I think that this time of year, once in a while, we see these guys over a very short sample size, just they're fresh, they're ready to go, and they take this opportunity and they run with it. I think we should be treating him as an RB3. And if we go in treating him as an RB3, then we'll be happy with the RB2 performances. But usage wise, he certainly looks that way. And you never know. It's not like this backfield is just littered with guys that are surefire bets to make the team next year. I mean, you could easily see them move on from Alexander Madison, Zamir White, Dylan Lobby, shout out Long Island, hasn't done a thing. So you could see Vegas enter the season with a rookie or free agent as their starting running back, and McCormick could do enough over these last few games that they say this is a guy who can be a backup running back for us in the NFL. So we're rooting for him. I had him very highly ranked in my waiver wire column this week, as I'm sure most did, because he's got the opportunity and a coach who loves using a back in this sort of way. We've already seen it. Why can't history repeat itself? Scott, every week in the Everything Report, you talk about XFP. You sort of rank players by their XFP for the season and then for the week as well. And one player who scored 18.9 points on the week, but could have had even more, was Devon Achane. This is a player who has been tremendous for us this season. Scores another touchdown this week. Continues to get peppered with targets. 7 targets, catches 6 of them. But Achane, again, scores 18.9 points. But with Raheem Mostert out, Achane, we saw a considerable spike in terms of his usage. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Career high in snap share, 83%, 31.6 XFP. Scored below that with 18.9, but that's like an insane number, easily a career high for him. Without Mostert, you see a snap share bump. He gets all of the near end zone work. And so, yeah, in any game with Tua, without Raheem Mostert, how should you value him? Ryan would say he's easily in consideration as the overall RB1. I would probably water that down just a little bit, top 3 maybe. Certainly top 5. And that distinction, I think, is well, it's interesting with Achane. So like now he's due for a positive regression, right? He's been pretty inefficient. He's been scoring well below his expected fantasy points, but like the XFP are elite, out of control. He's not game script sensitive because he's basically like a wide receiver too, as a pass catcher. And then he's also getting double digit carries and all the near end zone work. It's just like interesting how this happens. Like you would think, okay, here's a positive regression candidate, right? Here's Cortland Sutton positive. So like slowly ticking up. No. He just flips a switch and now he's a fantasy wide receiver 1. That's what we saw, from the first 7 or so weeks to today. I'm thinking about Tony Pollard. He was the most hyper efficient player in fantasy. His second to last year with the Cowboys in terms of XFP versus fantasy points. The next year, he was one of the least efficient. And you see the same thing with Achane, where he had the best ever season, not just rookie running back season, by yards per carry. And then this year, he's averaging, 3.9 yards per carry, went from 7.8 to 3.9. And so it's so weird how this happens. Like the regression guy, like you think it would just be like, okay, instead of 7.8 yards per carry, he's at 4.5. No. He's well below average. And it's just like so weird how that works. So this is just a, roundabout way of saying, yeah, I would say top 3. Ryan would say 1, because, Ryan thinks just,
Ryan also is an ageist, and he doesn't want to
That's
acknowledge
true,
those two older
that
guys.
is true.
So shout out to Ryan. We'll also say that it's kind of with Achane, yeah, it's kind of remarkable how the usage has changed. I think that we all sort of expected him to take a step forward as a receiver in year 2. That was always, part of the thesis and the narrative with him smashing this year is his upside's going to move up. We're going to see him in different ways. They're going to be more comfortable using him as a receiver, and it's really blown up. I mean, the guy's at 63 receptions on the season, leads all running backs with 6 touchdown catches on the year. And he is in a dead heat with Alvin Kamara. So it's sort of been like it's been where we've sort of speculated that this could happen, but I would bet on Devon Achane finishing the season with the most receptions at the running back position and passing Alvin Kamara by this week. Just my gut. Achane has 63 catches. Kamara has 64. Achane finishing the season with the most catches at the running back position, I think is going to put his 2025 ADP in fuego. People are going to get very excited about that stat. But let's talk about Kamara, because Kendre Miller returned, and there should be a little bit of concerns with the Kamara ceiling for the fantasy football playoffs. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his carry share fell all the way to 57%. Hasn't scored a touchdown in 7 straight games. And it looked like Kendre got that red zone role that Taysom Hill had. Darren Rizzi basically said as much. So I know Derek Carr is out for the season. I don't know that he's, I would say he's like a low end, mid to low end RB1. And when last week I was saying, yeah, he's a top 5 lock.
Yeah, and it was a grown-ass man touchdown too, which is the sort of like carry where, not all touchdowns are equal. When you watch that Kendre Miller touchdown run, it also made a huge difference in the game. And Darren Rizzi, it's like the complete opposite of Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen went out of his way to bash Miller whenever he could, whereas Rizzi is just all about Kendre Miller. So I think we'll see a good amount of Kendre down the stretch. Kamara is really going to need to deliver with the reception totals if he's going to give you that top 5 potential outcome. I think you're much better off kind of looking at it like Scott said, where Kamara will be a low-end RB1, and that's fine. But if you're expecting more, be prepared to be disappointed. Sticking at the running back position, this has been sort of an ongoing discussion that we've had for weeks now about this Kansas City backfield. What is your expectation level for Isiah Pacheco down the stretch? This whole backfield, really, are you trusting Pacheco in your lineup in a make it or break it week 15?
Oh man, this is a tough one. You saw his snap share jump from 33% to 48%. You could say he's trending in the right direction, or even that like the usage is already good. He had 70% of the backfield carries. But I don't know, 48% snap share is not great. I just, with the Chiefs, you worry. It's like, do they really want to fully unleash him right now? Like, isn't this who they are? Where, they're not going to really kick it into hyperdrive into the playoffs. Like, I just went on a rant on this on Twitter, just about how insane the odds are for the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl. It's plus 500. Do you know what it was September 1st? It was plus 500. And they have a 73% chance of locking up the number 1 seed and the bye. And so you basically get that for free. You have all these people who are like, crazy conspiracy theorists. The NFL is rigged. And it's like, okay, well, anyone who has bet on the Chiefs, sorry, anyone who has bet on the Chiefs in game when they're down in the 4th quarter, like they're up 5,000 units right now. So it's like, I don't think the NFL is rigged, but yeah, why not give me the one team where it might potentially be rigged for, is going to have the bye, has won each of the last 2 Super Bowls, has that Super Bowl experience. And yeah, but that's the thing, is you have all these analysts who are like, well, look at their point differential. Like they're not that. It's like, I don't know that they actually try in the regular season, because they don't need to. They're sleepwalking their way into a number 1 seed. And so, yeah, I don't know that they need to give Pacheco, workhorse bell cow volume. I think it would make more sense coming off an injury to have this be a committee, which is sort of what coach speak has implied. To me, he's just a low end RB2 this week.
Yeah, I don't think I'm trusting him. I think that he's going to get you about 15 touches. If he falls in the end zone, you're feeling good about that start. If he doesn't, you're feeling probably pretty terrible about it. But I think that it is what you want to see, that Pacheco is able to absorb volume. He's fully healthy, and I think they will unleash him in the fantasy playoffs. One storyline kind of not on the show sheet that, hopefully we'll have more information about when we meet next week is Hollywood Brown. They're sort of targeting this return. If ever a team needed a offensive spark of some sort, it's the Kansas City Chiefs, who look like they're completely stuck in the mud. So we'll keep an eye on that one. And hopefully we're talking about a Jameis Winston. And I usually like to stay completely neutral, but for content wise, it would be great to see Jameis Winston get a win over Kansas City and Cleveland this week. It gives us a lot more to talk about next week than a Patrick Mahomes wins like by 3 points again, something like that. Sticking with the running back position, James Cook is an enigma. He now has more touchdowns than any Buffalo Bills skill position player in the Sean McDermott era. He's got 12 touchdowns on the season, but he also had a sub 50% snap rate. So I think one thing is we try to take a deeper dive into the box scores. We try to take a deeper dives into all the metrics. And James Cook is the kind of player that if you're looking at counting stats this time of year, you're feeling a lot better about him in your lineup than if you're someone like yourself, Scott, who's taking a look at everything else, specifically snaps and trends. Where should people be viewing James Cook entering the fantasy football playoffs?
Yeah, he's tough. To me, he's just like a low end RB2. It looked like last week it was a 3-way committee, which would actually be a 4-way committee if you factor in Josh Allen. To me, he's just a low end RB2 who like will randomly explode for weeks where he scores multiple touchdowns. To me, I don't think that's this week against the Lions. It doesn't really make sense to me that it would, but really you just never know. And I haven't had any success predicting it from a DFS perspective when these sort of spike weeks come.
Yeah, it's funny. The last time that the two of us were in lockstep about James Cook maybe taking a step back, it was heading into week 8, and we were both like, this is going to be potential for Ray Davis to make a little bit more of a dent. And then James Cook got us that week. He had a 28 pointer. It was the best game of the season. That was maybe our most incorrect shared take of the entire School of Scott since we started doing this together. So James Cook, let us know in the comments if you disagree with us, but I don't like seeing anybody sub 50%. And you brought up, Kansas City for the playoffs. The Bills also don't have to give James Cook too many carries. They can very much work in different players. One thing I do think is they don't want Josh Allen's on this absurd touchdown running streak. I don't think they necessarily want that. And you start looking towards the end of the season as well, like that week 17, week 18 game. Do they sit James Cook potentially in week 18? I'm not sure. But James Cook, like this week for Detroit, I think maybe I'm a little bit higher on him than you are, but I agree that he's somewhere right in that mid RB2 range. And one player who could be actually rising up is Rachaad White. It's been a sort of emotional roller coaster for Rachaad White managers this year. He was basically usurped by Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving had the back-to-back 27-point games. We're sitting here gushing over Bucky Irving for multiple times on this show, Scott. And certainly in the Everything Report, you've sort of discussed Bucky Irving's rise. Joe Dolan was like, we can't use Bucky Irving on the thumbnail for your Dynasty article because I wrote about him so many times. I've got to chill out on it. But Bucky's been incredible. But now it looks like with Bucky's back injury, Rachaad White is trending up big time, specifically for this week. And if this is something that lingers with Irving, Rachaad White could be a player that impacts the fantasy football playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. This is just a really valuable backfield. It's, I think, the second or third most valuable backfield by total XFP. So where even like a 60% opportunity share could lead to RB1 fantasy numbers. Obviously feel best about a healthy Bucky Irving if he is healthy, just because he has the hyper efficiency to back it up. But if not, no, Rachaad White could go crazy. And I think it's notable now too that it's more of a 2-way committee than a 3-way committee. Sean Tucker only had 4 touches. and he didn't play until after Irving was done for the day with that injury. So yeah, there's tremendous upside here.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And Rachaad White also gives you that floor because if the backfield's all to himself, he's going to get all those backfield receptions. We also saw Irving take a big step forward as a receiver out of the backfield. That's sort of been Rachaad White's MO. The number two in running back touchdown receptions on the year behind Devon Achane is Rachaad White with 5. So he's been very efficient with them as well, and also fortuitous with his touchdown scoring. And yeah, you talked about how valuable this backfield is for running back scoring. Big shout out to Liam Cohen. You know, last year we were very excited about Dave Canales and what he was able to get out of Rachaad White. It's sort of a tradition that's continued in Tampa Bay with these backs being able to sort of outperform their expectations in multiple weeks. And a big shout out also to Ryan Grubb. We didn't even really talk about Zach Charbonnet's incredible game. Any thoughts on Charbonnet? This is one where 38 points this past week. What a unbelievable performance for Charbonnet. Ends up with 29 touches, catches 7 passes. I mean, Charbonnet has 8 rushing scores of the year. That's tied with Ken Walker. Really, he's been, in my opinion, the most valuable backup to have because he's given you these 3 RB1 performances that have been all smash games.
Yeah. Any game Ken Walker's out, he's an uber bell cow where, yeah, you're looking at a player who should be, I don't know, top 5 among running backs and rankings, maybe even a little above that. I will just say, like, that would also be true, I think, of Kenneth Walker if Charbonnet were out. And it's also, Charbonnet did benefit from, like, you look at like Seattle's had easily the worst run blocking offensive line in football through the first, I don't know, 5 or so weeks. They were 2 games in which Walker missed. They were closer to average, and then they just really fell off a cliff. And then last week, particularly in the first half, or last week, yeah, their best game run blocking ever. And Brian asked our film watchers or data charters about this, and they were like, yeah, Walker must have been fuming on the sidelines. Seattle, especially in the first half, the holes that they were opening up, Walker hasn't seen that in 8+ weeks, and this was probably their best performance yet. So I will just say, yeah, like you hear people running wild with Charbonnet is, he's so talented, he's more talented than Walker. I don't buy that. Really just think it's mostly a product of usage and then, benefiting from, I don't know, just randomly great offensive line play last week. But yeah, no doubt any game without Walker, Charbonnet is a must start, potential fantasy league winner. Does it sound like he's going to be back this week?
It sounds to me like it's, if I had to put money on it, it would be Charbonnet gets another start this week. That's just sort of the gut feel based on what we're hearing coming out of Seattle. And again, Scott and I are recording this on Wednesday, so things can change. But I do think we're going to get one more week of Zach Charbonnet. So I think this will be one that'll be interesting to hear people, discussing all offseason. Look at what Zach Charbonnet was able to do. Sort of a number of metrics will lean towards Charbonnet. And the bottom line is they're both really, really good at football. This is easily the best 1-2 backfield, I think, besides Detroit. Seattle's really has something with Charbonnet. I think that the nightmare would be Seattle does some, self-scouting and says we need to get both of these guys more involved next year, and we end up sort of limiting what we've been able to get out of the RB1 in the Ryan Grubb offense year 2. So I think this will be one for big offseason type discussion. But bottom line, if you have Charbonnet and Walker misses another game, it's just complete wheels up. He'll go 20 points or more, and the usage is going to be like Scott said. I mean, when you get Scott using the word uber bell cow, get excited because the usage is going to be pretty good. And Scott, a chance to do a little victory lapping. We love victory lapping this time of year. Jauan Jennings, what a great performance by Jennings. And to add a little bit of context, Jauan Jennings smashes, completely dominates the wide receiver targets in San Francisco, and he has this incredible performance while George Kittle gets 150 receiving yards. Talk a little bit about Jauan Jennings. Every time he does well, we're going to remind everybody that Scott was calling him a league winner weeks and weeks ago.
Yeah, he's led the team in targets in 5 of 5 games since returning from injury. 29% target share, ranks behind only Puka Nacua. Still ranks top 5 in yards per route run across the full season. And if you look at what he's done, especially if you adjust for that Blizzard game, the game Purdy set out, yeah, to me, definitely looks like a league winner. So feel really good about that call.
Yeah, no, I love it. And then when you combine it with Debo, looking like he's I don't want to say cooked.
Fat.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't
Say
want to say
fat.
cooked. I wouldn't want to say fat or cooked, but I'll say on the downward spiral of his career, like we've seen his best fantasy performance. Jauan Jennings is really trending up, and we talk about dynasty. Like I think Jauan Jennings is going to be one where, considering buying high right now, it's not something that could burn you down the stretch, because I think he's done enough that going into 2025, Jennings is going to have a clear role on this team. Brandon Ayuk's coming back, but I expect San Francisco to move on from Debo Samuel this offseason. Ricky Pearsall, of course, will take a step forward in year 2. But at the end of the day, I think Jennings is real, and I think Brock Purdy loves him. And this, I think, could continue. I think he's one that is just a very good player. And every single game where he's had 8 or more targets, he's had 16 or more fantasy points. So he's also a very efficient player. Excited to see him down the stretch. Chase Brown, any want a victory lap a little bit here on Chase Brown? Chase Brown, another smash week.
Another smash. You're just going to keep doing that insane Uber bell cow. And so it's the same thing. It's like, Charbonnet without Walker, easy game, must start, league winner, etc.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love it. And then we'll pile on with the victory lapping. Adam Thielen, we talked about him weeks and weeks before. And Adam Thielen looking like an every week wide receiver 2 moving forward in the fantasy playoffs. We're just building generational wealth for you here at the School of Scott through fantasy football league winning money. Scott, Trey McBride, let's quickly, will he end this horrible streak that he's on? The usage is absolutely incredible. The performances continue, but he hasn't caught a touchdown pass all year. This week, if he has 7 catches, then he will be the all-time leader. He'll break Deontay Johnson's 2022 record of the most receptions without a touchdown. Will he get one this week, Scott?
I will say it's not entirely bad luck, because he's not seeing a ton of end zone targets inside the 10-yard line, all that stuff. But he is definitely due. What you could do is you could look at XTD versus actual TDs. And there's a few players who have run worse in the touchdown department than he has. Romo Dunze, for instance, is one. I have no way of knowing when it's going to come. I will just say regression doesn't work the way you think it works. So like whenever he scores his first touchdown, he's going to add another 2 in that game, because that's just, for whatever reason, somehow how it works. It's either going to come one of these next few weeks, or it's going to come next season, and he'll have Gronkowski like touchdown numbers next year.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like McBride, it would have been a fantasy breaking season if he would have just had 6-7 touchdown catches this year. So yeah, maybe it happens. We keep saying maybe it happens in the fantasy football playoffs. This also seems like a game where Kyler Murray's due for a big bounce back game. That Seattle game, not so good, but New England is a get right potential opportunity for Arizona. And maybe you're right. This is a Trey McBride gets 2 touchdown grabs. Everybody goes nuts. Trey McBride managers are excited. Scott, give everybody one bold prediction for week 15 of the fantasy football playoffs. I'll give you mine first. Okay, I'll give you mine first. I'll give you a little time to prepare. Chuba Hubbard, 30-point week. This is the Levy breaks for Dallas week. Dallas is on a short week coming off of that loss to Cincinnati. Chuba Hubbard is going to go nuts. 30 points scored, 2 rushing touchdowns, and the Dave Canales-led Carolina Panthers beat Dallas by 10 or more.
That's a really good one. I'm just gonna copy that one. I do Everything Report is a look back piece. look forward. DJ Moore, I guess, maybe going nuclear
Yeah.
this week would be another one. But yeah, I get started on my look forward research on Wednesday. So
Yeah, and if you want Scott's look ahead stuff, make sure you're watching his DFS content. He'll give you plenty of predictions with that. Scott, anything else coming up for you?
No, just the DFS stuff. What about you?
Just grinding through, getting ready for the fantasy football playoffs. My dynasty article will drop over at Fantasy Points, and we're going to be bringing you shows like this every single week right here at School of Scott. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, and if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. We'll see you soon.